I'm sad. You've been out all night. No, you've been bad. Don't tell me different. No, it's
Welcome to the Ascent of Mount Carmel YouTube channel. This channel is primarily devoted to a reading and better understanding of the book Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. If you're not familiar with that book, or you haven't seen any of the installments, please do check them out. But this is the Catholic Urban Legends Revealed playlist. Today we're discussing a very old urban legend, and that's the contention that Catholic scholars spent time in idle speculation and debate about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Here's a YouTube clip from Crash Course in History.
My name is John Green, this is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about the Dark Ages. The other reason the Dark Ages are called dark is because Europe was dominated by superstition and by boring religious debates about how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. And while there's something to that, the Middle Ages also saw theologians like Thomas Aquinas, who was quite an important philosopher.
In just this little clip, there's a whole lot to discuss. But before we discuss about angels dancing on the head of a pin, let's talk about Crash Course in History's use of the loaded term, Dark Ages. According to Wikipedia, since the 20th century, the term Dark Ages has been mostly applied to just the 5th through the 10th centuries. Crash Course in History, however, seems to use the term for the entire Middle Ages, since they're referring to St. Thomas Aquinas, who lived in the 13th century. What's more perplexing, though, is that Wikipedia also tells us that many modern scholars avoid the use of the term altogether because of its negative connotations. They find that it's misleading and inaccurate for any part of the Middle Ages. Historian Christopher A. Snyder, in his book An Age of Tyrants, Britain and the Britons, says, historians and archaeologists have never liked the label Dark Ages. There are numerous indicators that these centuries were neither dark nor barbarous in comparison with other eras. Historian Ralph Raico, in his book The European Miracle, says, the stereotype of the Middle Ages as the Dark Ages, fostered by Renaissance humanists and Enlightenment philosophers, has, of course, long since been abandoned by scholars. Now let's move on to the urban legend itself. Crash Course in History says that Europe in the Middle Ages was dominated by boring religious debates about how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. They try to contrast that against St. Thomas Aquinas, who they say was quite an important philosopher. However, according to Wikipedia, it has not been ever proven that the question of how many angels can dance on the head of the pin was ever even disputed. It's theorized that this was just an early modern fabrication that was used to discredit Catholic scholastic philosophy. The urban legend was first concocted in 1637 by an anti-Catholic Protestant apologist named William Chillingsworth in his book The Religion of Protestants. So, this is just a very old urban legend that was widely known to be false from its very beginning. However, what makes the video from Crash Course in History particularly amusing is that they deride the supposed boring religious debates about angels fitting on the head of a pin, which didn't happen, while praising St. Thomas Aquinas, who they said was quite an important philosopher.
The other reason the Dark Ages are called dark is because Europe was dominated by superstition and by boring religious debates about how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. And while there's something to that, the Middle Ages also saw theologians like Thomas Aquinas, who was quite an important philosopher.
Now, the reason I say that this is somewhat amusing is that the anti-Catholic Protestants who made up this urban legend about angels dancing on the head of a pin did so to mock St. Thomas Aquinas in particular. According to StraightDope.com, Isaac Disraeli, who helped popularize this urban legend, was lampooning St. Thomas, who in my opinion was one of the smartest and greatest men who ever lived. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, St. Thomas never discussed how many angels can dance on the point of a needle. In fact, St. Thomas stresses that we must not think of angels as if they were corporeal or occupying any space. So, in summary, Crash Course in History criticizes St. Thomas, but then praises him at the same time for the exact same thing. I want to be clear that Crash Course in History didn't make up this urban legend, and they're just victims of bigoted anti-Catholic writers who concocted this mess a long time ago. However, Crash Course in History should have had a hint about St. Thomas's link to this particular urban legend, since he's also known as the Angelic Doctor. While I hope you enjoyed this installment of Catholic Urban Legends Revealed, we'll be back again soon with another one. In the meantime, please pray for the Church.
Could it be? Urban legend?
Urban legend.